Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for coming out this morning. When time changes this weekend, it won't be quite this dark this time of the morning, but thank you all for coming out. I think you're going to be delighted with the presentation today. I'm Chris Barnes, Professor of Business Management here at Lakeland. And again, I want to thank you for coming out to the Siemens Distinguished Lecture Series in Engineering, Manufacturing, and Entrepreneurship at Lakeland Community College. The lecture is made possible by the generous donation from the Building Technology Division of Siemens Industry, Inc., who provides innovative solutions that integrate HVAC with security technology and fire protection. More information is available on the back of your program. Again, thank you so much for coming out. Our speaker today is Douglas Huber. Mr. Huber has over 30 years of experience in support, design, and managing of the infrastructure and networks for a number of large international companies. In these roles, he has held senior technical and management positions, including functioning as Chief Technology Officer for a regional network management consulting firm. In addition, he is a security architect for Materion Corporation and oversees the network engineering and information security functions. He currently teaches network engineering and IT security courses at Lorain County Community College and Akron University. As a faculty member, he has coached student cyber defense teams for regional competition. His goal in teaching is to provide students with practical skills and knowledge that can be readily applied and become the foundation for future skills and knowledge. He possesses a number of letters, CISSPGCIH. I have no idea what these mean, so I can continue to do those, or we'll just say lots of certifications. He has a master's in economics from Cleveland State University. Doug lives in Marblehead and drove all the way here, left at 4:30 this morning, with his wife, Linda. So thank you, everyone. Can we give welcome to Doug?
Well, thanks for coming out. I'd like to thank Chris for inviting me to come out and kind of share some thoughts with you. My background, as she kind of went through, has been in IT ever since I got out of graduate school, even though I do have a degree in economics. And I've been doing this for a few years. And I put the slide together, it was actually kind of surprising how many years I've been doing it. And I do a couple of different things currently. One of them is I am a faculty member, as she said, at Lorain and Akron University, and do a lot of network engineering security courses. And I also oversee the network engineering function and IT security function for a local manufacturer, that has an international presence. In my career, I've also done a lot of consulting. I spent 11 years with a network engineering consulting firm. So I've had the benefit of seeing a lot of companies, small and big, and the challenges they have and their security problems and how they've addressed them. Everyone's got a little different take on how they do these kind of things. And I'm also a member of InfraGard, which is an FBI-based security organization. Just kind of got off their board. I'm currently the sector chief for Northern Ohio in critical manufacturing. So I get to hear a lot of interesting information about current trends, current issues, as well as how companies are addressing those sort of things. I'm always recruiting for InfraGard, so anyone's out there in the manufacturing sector that wants to be part of that, feel free to contact me on that. We're always looking for folks to join that kind of information sharing sort of function. To highlight kind of where we are, let's look back kind of where we came from. And my earliest recollection of what you might consider malware, actually we probably should call it pre-malware, was right out of graduate school. I worked for a company, actually a division of Case Western Reserve University, that specialized in Sperry Univac mainframes. They were a big competitor to the classic IBM mainframe. And there was a program called Animal that would show up on program distribution tapes from time to time. And it really was a game. I mean, and we call it pre-malware because it had no malicious intent. The author didn't design it to be malicious, and it did no damage. But you played this little guessing game of guessing the animal, and while you're playing this game, it's copying itself into every accessible directory that it could find. Therefore, it found its way all around the world, and everyone thought that was kind of clever and cool. But it was non-malicious, and this is kind of where this whole area started. I was at a conference recently in which this timeline was kind of presented. In the early days, we had worms, viruses, and Trojan horses, and even back in those days, in the late 90s, most of that malware wasn't really all that malicious. It would sometimes consume a lot of resources, kind of unintentionally. But it was more prankster sort of things, young people exercising their technical skills, trying to impress their friends and whatnot. And then we moved into more of the cyber crime. Criminals started seeing opportunities with this stuff. We moved on to that the second era between 2004 and 2008. A lot of cyber crime, a lot of financially oriented cyber crime. And now we're into really exotic stuff. Espionage, advanced fraud techniques. We've got cyber warfare going on. We've got hacktivism. It's amazing how these tools are used. And if you look back, when's the last time anyone worried about a virus? I mean, it's just not, the Melissa virus, Code Red, those kind of days are really kind of gone. We worry about really much more advanced kind of attacks. And if you look at the technical skills required for these attacks, they're pretty advanced. It's pretty high-tech stuff. And there's lots of great tools out there. Some of these tools are more advanced than commercial software to help folks commit cyber crimes. So things have changed a lot. What we worry about now are things like botnets. Phishing and social engineering is huge. It's probably our biggest problem. Advanced persistent threat. This is where folks come in and they camp out in your network. So they're not there to do something damaging so much, it's that you recognize it. They want to live in your network, your corporate network, and be there for years if they can. There's even been instances in which these cyber hackers have camped out in people's networks and fixed problems. It's a little free tech support. Why do they do that? Because they don't want the system administrator coming around fixing the problem and maybe finding them. So, it's better to go fix the Exchange server issue, as elves in the night kind of thing, than to have some administrator come and trip over, the fact that they're there. And there's lots of examples of major multinational corporations that have been victims of advanced persistent threats. Industrial control system attacks have just really kind of come to the consciousness. They've been out there for a while, but we'll get more into that with Stuxnet in Iran. That kind of brought it to the public consciousness. Cyber warfare now is a topic to be addressed. All countries, militaries have a cyber warfare component now to their armed services. And then economic espionage, which is really kind of the big intent, stealing intellectual property. We'll talk more about that and what's happening there. So the issues we got going on today that are kind of unique or kind of have brought these issues to fore us. Mobility, it's a mobile world. We'll talk about kind of what's the unique nature of mobility and what it's done for us here. Governments are involved. That's always a big issue. Organized crime has woken up to the internet and technology. They become very technically savvy. Industrial networking is more pervasive. And in fact, industrial networking is going to slowly move us into the last topic there, the Internet of Things. And we'll talk about Internet of Things and where that's all going to go. And then, technology keeps moving faster and faster and faster. It's tough for people in the defense side of this equation to keep up with some of these technological changes. And for some reason, the cyber crime community seems to be maybe a couple of steps ahead all the time. Because we're chasing them. They're developing new tools and new techniques, so we're busy chasing them as opposed to us being really out in front of the kind of the problem. Let's take a look at some of these things. Mobility. Mobility applications bring a unique kind of challenge to the table in that the application's interested in where you are geographically. You know, your smartphone's constantly asking you, is it okay if News Channel 5, you know, tracks your current location, right? Because, you know, when you bring up the weather, they want to bring up the weather where you are, kind of thing. So it's a really nice kind of feature, brings up kind of privacy issues. You know, people get concerned about my cell phones busy tracking me around geographically. So it's kind of a new dimension for applications. It's a new dimension for cybercrime. People can use these tools to stalk people, you know, and track what people's movements are, those kind of things. There's a larger audience of victims in mobility. We all have smartphones. We all have smartphones, a tablet, and probably a couple of PCs. So there's a larger opportunity, more devices to infect, different technologies, different opportunities for, you know, the cybercrime world to have an impact on all of our devices. It used to be that corporations would secure their perimeters, both physically, you know, locks on the door, as well as their networks, firewalls, things like that. Those days are getting kind of blurry because of this mobility issue. And so we have something called borderless networks. You know, Cisco's got a whole concept of borderless networks. The corporate network doesn't live inside my physical building anymore. My corporate network actually lives at Panera Bread and Starbucks and the Hilton Hotel and any place else that I can get a Wi-Fi connection. These Wi-Fi connections are the most insecure form of media, right? You know, a nice hardwired cable is much easier for us technology folks to secure than a wireless connection. However, wireless connections are really convenient. They're ubiquitous everywhere, and people take them for granted. You know, should you be doing your banking on a wireless network? Most people do. You really don't know what you're connecting to. We have no clue whether, I just connected to the Lakeland Guest thing here. I don't know if it's really the Lakeland Guest thing or not. It said it was, but there's all kinds of really nice tools. Someone's going to be sitting out in the lobby on a laptop and mimicking the Lakeland Guest network. So all my traffic's really running through, you know, that guy's PC, and he can be sniffing my transactions. This happens all the time at public hotspots, you know, like airports and hotels and, you know, conferences and that kind of thing. You say, well, okay, I got an encrypted link to my bank. I feel pretty secure. Well, we all know that SSL is vulnerable. There's just been a recent attack called the Poodle attack that just came out here the last couple of weeks. Well, you can intercept these supposedly secure connections, and you may or may not know it, depending on how the attacker came after your connection. So a lot of corporations have policies. They try to educate their traveling employees about don't do confidential work, you know, while waiting at the airport, you know, on your laptop or on your wireless phone, because, you know, we really don't know. But it's just so convenient. You know, people just can't resist it. So wireless is a problem all under itself in terms of security. And of course, we got the privacy issue, and we've got the fact that we've got all these mobile devices. You know, privacy is I think one of these iceberg issues in terms of, you know, we read about it in the news a lot. We kind of see the tip of it. I don't think we have any clue as to what's beneath the surface. That we're going to find this out over, you know, as the decades roll by. The Supreme Court just had a real interesting ruling about smartphones. You know, can a police officer grab your smartphone, you know, when you're arrested and, you know, and evaluate the contents? Well, they thought they could. Well, went to the Supreme Court because they said it's no different than if I arrest you and you've got an address book in your pocket. You know, and I thumb through the address book and I find, you know, interesting information about a crime or your criminal cohorts or something like that. Well, I thought it was interesting. The Supreme Court actually, the logic was there's more access through that device than your typical address book in someone's pocket. You know, through the cloud systems and what's on your phone, your entire life is accessible potentially through that smartphone. There's more things accessible through that smartphone than anyone would ever really carry on them physically. You have to be, you know, dragging a cart of a library with you in order to carry that much information. So therefore, it's unreasonable. That's considered illegal search and seizure. So you got to get a search warrant now to really, you know, look into someone's smartphone. So, you know, our technology is advancing faster than some of our, you know, legal and social norms, And here was a case where the Supreme Court got pretty technically savvy. I thought it was a pretty subtle sort of decision about understanding exactly how is a smartphone not like my address book in my pocket. Anyhow, so there's a lot of unique privacy issues just due to the mobility factor. The fact that we can carry this stuff around and it's accessible. It can also be stolen. A lot of people lose cell phones when they're out and about, and who knows what's on those kind of devices. Governments get involved. And the old adage of if the only tool you have is a hammer, then every problem looks like a nail, kind of applies to the government space. How does the government address any kind of issue with cybercrime? We need more laws and more regulation. We see that a lot. Anytime there's some sort of a cyber issue, someone introduces a bill, or there's got to be some sort of a regulation to it. And it's true, we do need those things. Those are incentives that get people thinking about security, but it's like the first step down the right road. But governments tend to kind of stop right there. More laws, more regulations. And we've had lots of issues of that, with lots of regulations, especially in the federal computing space. Thou shalt do the following list of things, and the time goes by and the list of things isn't done. So they come up with another mandate, and they can't keep rolling along. So sometimes mandates just don't do it. We got to kind of change our thinking process. So one of the things that I'm going to try to communicate to you guys today is that you're really part of the solution. You're the problem. First of all, I'm going to convince you you're the problem, and then we're going to convince you you're the solution. Now, usually when I give these talks, people get all paranoid. You hear about all these kind of attacks, and we just talked about cell phones and whatnot. And I gave a presentation to a group of CFO, kind of corporate accounting folks, and I had people afraid to log on their machines and use their cell phone afterwards. I told them it's okay, in a couple of days you'll be fine. 2 or 3 days you'll be back to using your initials as passwords and all that kind of thing. So, so if you feel a little paranoid, you'll be okay. Government regulation is going to be becoming more. Government has cyber warfare aims. I attended a conference not long ago in which they had a speaker there from the War College, which was he was an interesting person to hear. And he explained this as, before we had aircraft, before the Wright brothers invented the airplane, we didn't have an Air Force. We had navies and land-based kind of military operations. But as soon as we could fly, that's a new frontier. That's a new place to have conflict, right? So we have to have an Air Force and all the things that went along with that. Now we've got the internet, we've got networks. It's just another frontier in which people can have conflicts. So therefore, there's a cyber warfare aspect. Good or bad, kind of a sad story in a way, but cyber warfare is something that we're going to be victims of eventually here in the U.S. So we need to get ready for it, and we need to have our capabilities too. So there's a whole, for students, there's another whole career there in the military in an IT kind of dimension. The attacks have gone from just, we hear about credit card breaches, Target and Home Depot had some recent breaches. But the real problem is in economic espionage. In fact, the federal government considers the economic espionage issue a national security issue. The FBI, at least as much as a year ago, had it listed as their number 2 priority behind terrorism, was to control this economic espionage that goes on from both private and government-based attackers. We all read in the news about how China's coming after our industry, trying to steal trade secrets and intellectual property and that kind of thing. It's a huge problem, and our companies lose billions of dollars a year. We'll see some more on that. And then, of course, now political and social protest, hacktivism. The anonymous issues of a year or so ago, there's some social issue somebody wants to get some attention on, so I'll use hacking technologies, denial of service attacks, whatever, to kind of get my point across, or try to cause injury to some organization that I don't think is doing a good job. This is a common issue now on the internet. Organized crime entered the space fairly quickly because they discovered there was money to be made. And it's easy money. It's low risk. As a cyber criminal, you can sit in the calm of your basement, be anonymous, set yourself up so it's hard to track. You can almost make it so that a law enforcement authority probably never would find you by the time you go through all the anonymization sort of technologies. And I can commit all kinds of fraud. And it's lucrative. And so, it's low risk. I can move myself to a jurisdiction in which the legal framework is such that either they don't understand the technology or they don't care. We got countries in both sides of that equation. So it's great. And all I got to do is get 2 or 3 people to fall for some of these fraud attacks. Some of these fraud attacks, like the Nigerian letters. I think probably everyone in this room, you'd read them, you'd laugh. Yes, I have an unknown uncle who was a colonel in some army someplace and died and has $18 million. And if only I send a check for $50,000 to cover some kind of a transaction fee, I can share in all this wealth. It's all misspelled, and you say, who would fall for this? All they need is one person. They send it to thousands. All they need is one gullible person to fall for that. And it was worth their while. It's made a quick, whatever, $50,000 or something. I see these fraud attempts happening almost every month. In my field, I have some kind of a fraud sort of issue to look at, or at least is reported to me as, hey, look at this email. People pretending to be who they aren't. Oh, I'm really the CEO of the company. Please, wire $300,000 to this account in Switzerland. And you read some of this stuff, and it's just laughable. But people fall victim for this. Even companies will fall victims for this. The bigger the company, the more likely they may fall victim, because they're big, they're bureaucratic. People tend to operate in rote fashion, and they're looking for that. They generally send the fraud attempt to some low-level person with some higher-level executive's name on it, and you're going to say, well, I'm not going to question the CFO of the company. I'm just going to process this thing and not question it. That's what they're hoping for. So this is the social engineering side of this kind of world. It happens with individuals. There's been on the news these recent calls. I'm from the IRS. These things are laughable. I'm from the IRS. We've just audited your tax return from 3 years ago and discovered that you made a mistake and you really owe us $300. And you better pay up by 5 o'clock this afternoon, or I'm going to send the sheriff out to arrest you. And by the way, you need to pay us in gift cards. People believe it. We laugh at it. You think, the IRS doesn't want gift cards. This is ridiculous. But people fall for this, and all they need is a couple of people. So this stuff goes on and on and on and on. And one of the more dastardly ones are, they victimize senior citizens. They call up and say, hey, your grandson or your granddaughter is overseas. They've been injured or arrested or in trouble, or something's happened, and you need to wire $5,000 right away so they can get a plane ticket home or whatever. They're playing on people's fears. Some of these people, are having medical issues, so their thinking's not as clear, and that's what they're counting on. And all they need is a couple of people to fall for this, and they're in. So, cyber crime is huge, and it's usually wrapped around a huge social engineering component. And then there's botnets, which probably almost somebody, or probably more than somebody in this room, is part of a botnet. You just don't know it. And this is where a cyber criminal goes out and they infect people's PCs. I sent you the email message, you clicked on the attachment, you got my malware. Or you went to a website that I somehow socially engineered you into going to, and you got my malware. So I got control of your machine now. You don't know it, I don't want you to know it, so my malware is designed to not cause any issues for you. You might notice the machine's a little slow now and then, but people kind of write that off. I write that off. I get thousands of machines infected. I then go out to the cyber criminal world and I sell the services of my botnet. Maybe I've stolen a bunch of password hashes from some organization, and I want a distributed computing grid to go crack the passwords this weekend. Well, botnets are great for that. Maybe I'm a hacktivist, and I'm mad at who's MasterCard. I think was a recent victim of this in the last couple of years. I'm mad at MasterCard, so I think I want to do a denial of service attack on their website, so their customers don't get the service that they're expecting, and cause that organization embarrassments. Right? Botnets are great for that kind of denial of service attack. And so what happens is I sell the service, I get my payment, I then instruct all my infected machines to go do something. On Saturday night at 7 o'clock, or whatever the plan is. And it's machines like your personal machines, machines that people have sitting on their desk at work. Immediately kind of hop to action and do whatever that function is. These botnets are huge. Every now and then you hear about how the FBI or some law enforcement organization has taken down some huge botnet of 10,000 machines or something. The people who are infected don't know it. They're kind of innocent victims of these things. But botnets are huge. 375 million infected computers that they know about, and losses of $113 billion a year from botnets alone. And a clever botnet that I ran into was one in which they was offering basically voice telephone service. They had a private voice system, so cyber criminals could talk to each other. Exchange their plans or whatever, conspire around what their attacks were, and they had bought the services of a botnet to do that. So organized crime is out there. A lot of it comes out of Eastern Europe, but it's really everywhere. Industrial networks. This is new frontier country. It's Stuxnet in Iran was kind of the first public consciousness of industrial networks being attacked. But I call these death and destruction networks because these are the networks and automation techniques that control factories, plants, pipelines, the electric grid, water systems. We could go on and on thinking of things that control systems are out there doing. If those get compromised, those can have some really serious consequences. Which is why they're called death and destruction networks. I can blow up facilities, I can cause massive outages, and in the news we hear about there's worries about the electric grid. If the electric grid would get compromised, you could shut down whole sections of the country. In fact, there was an issue down in the southeast around Louisiana where there actually was an electric grid hacked. The Secret Service admitted it was some kind of a hacking incident that took down that grid. No one really knows the breadth of this stuff. And the bad news is most of our control systems are older. These aren't like normal business networks where every 3 to 5 years I kind of refresh my technology, new servers, new switches, These are things that get built in a facility. They're very expensive, they're very complex, and it's not something I'm going to rip out and upgrade very readily. In fact, it may be easier to rebuild the plant than to change out the control system, depending on the facility. So the control systems we have in place today in like steel mills, those are like 15, 20, 30 years old. So it's not like the manufacturers of these systems don't have good technology. They do today, but it's going to be 20 or 30 years before today's technology ends up in new plants and infrastructure that's out there. So we're really vulnerable because these systems weren't built 30 years ago, 15 years ago, with really security in mind. It's control engineers that run these kind of systems. They're interested in their engineering puzzle. Security isn't top of mind for them. These networks tend to be devoid from the normal IT process. So your normal corporate IT staff generally isn't all that closely involved in industrial networks. And therefore, the security mindset that I might have for the normal business network doesn't really always get rolled out to the industrial control networks. So historically, it hasn't had a strong security culture. The Internet of Things, we hear that every now and then. You read about the Internet of Things. I'm not sure how many people really kind of know what that means. I'm not sure anyone really fully defined it, but it's this age now of sensors and a lot of control systems being extended out to everyday life, your house, your car, those kind of things. So the opportunities in industrial control networks is going to spread out much wider than simply manufacturing facilities. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we get to the Internet of Things. But this is a new area. And I understand that our national labs are out there busy analyzing all of the various control systems, from Siemens, Rockwell, all the major manufacturers. They're out there analyzing this and working with these manufacturers to understand how would you hack one of these and what can we do to protect it better. So everyone's kind of on this case, but it's relatively recent. And it came out of the Stuxnet kind of issues. Now, how that actually worked was, I infected the control system and I varied the voltage, the power characteristics going to equipment, just slightly, just enough that over time I start burning out motors and burning out electronics. And a very subtle, stealthy kind of attack. But you just imagine the opportunities we have in this building. This is a new building. There's a building automation network here that controls the lights, the heating, the air conditioning, elevators, life safety systems, in addition to all of the video, the audio, the normal data, and whatnot. Imagine getting control of the building automation system in this building. Where you could all of a sudden, shut off all the power, you could turn up the heat, turn off the heat, you could cause quite a bit of havoc. And that's just this building alone. So a lot of opportunity here for hackers, and the hackers know it, and they're busy getting their skills up to date, and they're getting their tools built to do this. And of course, the government-sponsored hackers are right there. Fast-moving technology. It's hard for us to keep up with it. We see new vulnerabilities almost every week that come out. Heartbleed, the Poodle attack that just recently was announced. These things just come up as faster than we can almost respond to them. Going back to industrial networks, all kinds of opportunities there that we don't even have a clue as to kind of what's going to happen. So new opportunities, and we also have the issue of big data and big privacy problems kind of roll together. Now, big data, cuts two ways. It's the old dual-edged sword. There's lots of benefits to big data, and there's lots of questions and problems to big data. And that's part of, I think, the fast-moving technology picture that's going to be out there. And of course, we talked about the Internet of Things being everywhere, and we'll get kind of more into that. Internet of Things, medical devices. There was concern about a new way of assassinating political leaders. If they have a pacemaker, pacemakers have wireless connections. So when you go to visit your doctor, uses basically a computer to talk to the pacemaker and get medical parameters about you, and maybe even adjust the pacemaker. And so there's concerns that you could kill somebody that way. Sit within 50 feet Bluetooth range and cause the pacemaker to do something that would cause someone to die. You go to a modern hospital, lots of automation systems in operating rooms and throughout the facility to monitor patients and deliver medications and that kind of thing. Automobile automation, that's big. Google's got their self-driving car. Almost every manufacturer's got some kind of automation scheme going. I understand General Motors has something now as you drive down the road, you get a little sleepy and you veer off, the seat buzzes that kind of pull you back onto the road. They've got technology now that if you get too close to the car in front of you, the brakes automatically get applied. All these kind of things, self-driving, self-help kind of cars. I just hope someone's thinking about the security issues. When my car starts talking to the car in front of me and talking to the road signs on the side of the road, I'm kind of worried that the guy behind me might be a hacker. He could spoof these kinds of signals. And also my car is driving off the road. I can't control it because it thinks it needs to do that because of either an error or someone has hacked the vehicle. Almost every vehicle's got computers in it. They've been there for years. And when you go in to get your car serviced, they plug into a data port underneath the dash, and they read out all this information, and then they discover you really need a new fuel pump because it's not pumping quite the pressure it needs to be. And that's all great. High-end cars do that with Bluetooth. So I don't need to plug in underneath the dash. I just drive into the service bay, and the computer talks to my car and does all that self-diagnosis. Well, there's been issues of people hacking that connection. and causing your car to run, improperly or whatever. So you're driving down the road and the guy behind you, decides to have some fun, and now, your car is running rough or maybe stops running at all. Imagine all the havoc that could happen with that. So they need to worry about security. I don't hear security as something that's on top of mind. We had this discussion a couple of weeks ago with the Google car actually reads road signs. So they can read the speed limit sign and know that it's supposed to be, 35 miles an hour. So I said, well, what happens here on Halloween when somebody takes, spray paint and makes the 3 look like an 8? Will the Google car think now it's 85 miles an hour? Well, they got you covered. I understand that they have a database of all roads, kind of from the GPS technology, in which they verify the sign. It looks like the sign said 85, but I look in the database and this road really is a 35 mile an hour road. Therefore, that must have been, a tampered with sign, and I'm all okay. I don't know if I really want to depend upon all that complexity working all the time. So the security issue in these automation systems are going to be really tough. Of course, we got smart appliances. We got refrigerators keeping track of the inventory. So you can order more milk when you use the last pitcher of milk, kind of thing. We got the smart grid. We have in plants like in buildings like here we have smart grid probably. Lights go off at night. The heat goes down when the room's not occupied. That's coming to your house now. So they can optimize the power usage and be more efficient and use less power potentially and whatnot. Lots of automation going on in the military scenario. Your typical soldier is just laden with all kinds of technology. At Lorain, we were part of a project. We had some students part of a project on convoy systems. When these large convoys of trucks, they form and they fall apart dynamically. A truck joins, a truck pulls off and goes another direction. How do you join a network that would have all these trucks together so they could have a gigantic conference call? You have cameras so that the truck at the beginning of the line can see behind the truck, 20 trucks back kind of thing. And of course it needs to all be encrypted so the enemy can't snoop on this kind of stuff. How do you make this all dynamic? Well, these students actually built this whole system out of open source software, demonstrated it up at Warren, Michigan. And it was kind of clever, but a lot of automation and of course a lot of opportunity for the enemy now it's a new frontier for them to attack, right? Send in fake messages, send in fake video, that kind of, hide the video that's really happening kind of thing. And then this one I thought was we have smart cattle now. It's wireless chips put in cattle so that the ranchers can keep track of the cattle and their health and parameters. You could hack the cow, I guess. I don't know what it would happen, what the benefit would be, but I'm sure there's one out there. So this Internet of Things is huge, and it's going to get larger and larger and larger. A lot of home automation stuff's going on with you can from my cell phone I can say, oh gee, I forgot to lock the front door, so I can lock the front door. I can look at cameras on my porch or something. I can turn the lights on 5 minutes before I pull in the driveway. All those kind of cool things. Well, those are all kind of cool things that a home burglar could really get excited about as well. So what's the risk? Well, data breaches are huge. Those are the things we see in the news a lot. Credit cards get compromised. My thesis is, and we get to it a little more, is that we have a whole new definition of privacy. We just don't know it. Our minds haven't really caught up with the privacy nature that's going on out there. Big data is big mining for a lot of this fraud and personal crime. I just read an article recently, we're in the political season now, right? And we're coming up on our presidential campaign, so we're really in the political season, even beyond the midterm election. And as these campaign workers, walk around neighborhoods, they've got apps on their phone. And as they walk to the door, they know up to 700 things about you. And it's all about predictive analytics, right? I need to figure out, where you sit in the political spectrum, what issues might you be concerned about, what might your fears be, your passions, all that kind of. So I can tailor my message to fit, and make you think my candidate is, the perfect candidate in your mind. But they've mined this all out of Facebook and public records. They know what kind of cars you've bought. Oh, you always buy Fords or GM products. That all says something potentially about you. Amazon's been doing this for years, right? In terms of what you buy, you log on, and they start peppering you with, hey, you might be interested in this book or this music or this appliance. The only problem with that stuff is I buy something for my sister. It throws off the analytics because they start then giving me stuff that I'm really not interested in because I bought something for my, for my sister's birthday or something. So I'm not. Some of this stuff can be off, but that's kind of the scary thing, in that they're going to rely on this data in terms of we know about you, and maybe they really don't. We had this discussion in my security class the other day about the scary thing about big data, the whole NSA data collection, big data thing, is that now a legal authority is going to have a perception of you based upon all this unknown data they collected. And it may not be accurate, but they're going to think that's you. So they're going to, and they're going to react accordingly. So now, the coercive force of government has the wrong view of you based upon some misguided predictive analytics that went on from big data. So huge privacy issue and huge personal crime area opportunity there. Losing intellectual property. The measurements of lost intellectual property out of U.S. corporations is just an eye-opening number. It's amazing. In fact, they link it to the loss of jobs. I've heard some presentations in which they say part of the unemployment's due to all the hacking that goes on from foreign governments and foreign corporations stealing intellectual property, trade secrets, that kind of thing, from U.S. businesses. And a lot of it we don't hear about because it doesn't make the news. Corporations don't want people to know that I just lost the secret sauce. So they're not very vocal about it. But every now and then you hear about some of this stuff. And if you really go out and read it, you can find out about some very large companies have lost some really significant property this way. And how does it work? You have a company, you've invested time and millions of dollars developing some product, figuring out something, and now you're making it. And you're recouping your years and years of investment. Some offshore company comes and takes all that information. They break into your network, they take that information, and now they're making that same product, but they didn't invest anything, right? They just took your property. And now they can make it cheaper because you have to recover your cost. Your millions of dollars and years of investment you got to get out of the product you sell. They don't have to do that. They can sell it cheaper. And maybe they're in a market where the labor is cheaper and things are cheaper, and now you're out of business because someone else is making that product instead. I mean, that's the general issue that goes on. So back to our industrial networks, loss of life. Terrorism, I'm just glad that terrorists aren't as good at hackers as we fear they might be, because you really could cause some serious damage taking over industrial networks. Disable the country's economy. Just imagine if all of a sudden major steel mills got hacked and blast furnaces got disabled. The nature of these kind of things is if the furnace shuts down inappropriately, you don't have a blast furnace anymore. You now have a molten chunk of metal. You're back to square one rebuilding this stuff from the beginning. So you can shut down major chunks of supply chains and whatnot. We all hear about the power grid going down, but it's even worse than that with just normal corporations. And then imagine tampering with the Internet of Things, messing with your car, messing with your pacemaker. It could get very personal pretty quick in the Internet of Things if that stuff gets hacked. So here's some bullets here on the impact of these breaches. The loss is on the rise every year. I just went to a manufacturing conference and they had a chart in which it is just straight up. Every year it doubles, it triples in terms of the losses due to data breaches. These breaches now are becoming part of the business problem. Because, just think when Target got hacked. I bet you a lot of people thought, well, I don't think I'll go to Target this weekend. I'm just not sure. I'll go somewhere else. But Target's in good company now, right? Home Depot got hacked, Dairy Queen got hacked. Was it Kohl's or Nordstrom's or somebody got hacked? So a lot of retailers have gotten hacked. So they're looking like a normal company again. So they'll be okay probably. But it is true that we form a perception when we hear about companies having these breaches, banks, that kind of thing. You're immediately going to think they're not safe, they're not taking good care of my data and whatnot. More and more customers are baking security into contracts. I'm going to contract with you to supply some part for my product. I want to know that you're taking proper security precautions with the data I give you so that you can supply me. And maybe we even connect our networks together so we can automatically order things and whatnot. I want to make sure that some attack's not going to come running down that connection to me. So there's lots of wordings in terms of conditions of contracts these days in which we want to know that the other side is as secure as we think we are, and have some sort of liability control over these things. So it's becoming part of the business problem, which is a good thing. The more it becomes part of the business problem, the more likely is some good things we'll do to mitigate it. Countries are after each other. You read in the news a lot about China. China's got an entire infrastructure set up for that. Russia, I just read how Russia hacked the executive office building network. The EOB network was compromised just recently, like the last 2 or 3 days, and now they think it was Russia that did it. So a little bit of maybe a little cyber warfare in that dimension. Israel, France, they've all been accused of hacking companies here in the U.S. to steal intellectual property. So even countries that you would think would be not on the list are on the list. And it's just now that U.S. companies, I think, are getting with the larger companies are with the program, probably have been for a while. Smaller companies are still, not thinking about security as much. I just heard driving in from Marblehead, Bloomberg, that smaller companies are still kind of slow getting to implementing IT security defense policies in their networks. But more and more, having a good IT security posture is part of your competitive advantage. You're going to be looked at and measured by you taking the appropriate steps to secure your information and your customers' information. Is this going to be an assumed kind of thing? And that, I think that's a good thing. The more it becomes part of the normal business problem, the more it will be kind of addressed. The market for stolen data is huge. If you ever think, what's the sense in all this cyber crime, just go look at the marketplace. And there is a marketplace for all this stuff. Stolen credit cards go for about $1 each. Okay, so if you're going to go, do a breach at Target, you don't want to just get yourself, 10 or 12 credit cards. You want millions in order to make it worthwhile. So I need to go for the corporate headquarters and get the entire load of credit cards. And of course, credit cards, the value declines by the minute. Because a fresh credit card that was stolen this morning, it's likely I can use it. As it drags by a day or two, maybe you discover it, you call your credit card issuer, and the card gets shut down. So, a credit card that was stolen a week ago has less value because the probability that I can really use it is diminished quite a bit. Medical information is huge. $10 per credentials, $50 for patient files. And 43% of breaches involve medical information. Why do people want medical information? That's so I can go get health care and not have to pay for it. I can pretend I'm you. And I've actually heard a number of cases of people here in Cleveland in which all of a sudden they get a bill from their insurance provider, for the deductible part of your broken leg that you had last month. And it's like, I didn't have a broken leg. What's this all about? You go to the hospital and they start describing the patient. It's not you at all. I mean, it just doesn't fit, And so people are stealing credentials in order to masquerade themselves as you, it's medical fraud. You know, the FBI has an entire unit focused on medical fraud. You know, fraudulent billing, all these kind of activities. That's how huge it is. It's one of their, you know, priorities is to investigate that kind of stuff. So stolen property, $300 billion a year, and that's the stuff that's got reported. So you got to know there's a lot more out there that never made the official reporting cycle, so we don't know. So it's a lot of money, and you can see how that would tie back into jobs. As companies either lose plants or product lines or customers, you know, that means people get laid off because that business has declined. So what are we going to do about it? The big thing is you. And this came out in the last couple of years. In IT security, it was thought that this is a technology issue. You know, so generally the business management in a company would say, yeah, that's IT worries about that. You know, I don't have to worry. I'm going to worry about my inventory and my cash flow and all that kind of thing. It's just now the message is starting to seep in, and the larger companies have got it. Bloomberg just reported that the majority of boards have this as like number 1 or number 2 priority on their list of things to address is information security. But until recently, it's been a technological problem. And now we slowly have discovered, and if you go to a lot of security conferences, you'll hear this theme over and over, the problem is all of us. The average employees working in the workplace is your front line of IT security. And we just got to get them to know it and understand that and start, you know, behaving in a way that protects the company assets. Another popular thing to do now, especially large corporations, is behavioral analysis. You know, this has a huge privacy thread into it, but you know, you're a senior person at a company, you have access or knowledge of a lot of confidential information, you know, new projects, new research, new technologies. They want to know you're trustworthy. You know, trustworthy is getting to be kind of a problem to understand. So a lot of large HR departments are putting in, you know, programs to do background checks, track people's behavior, try to predict when maybe someone's, you know, not trustworthy anymore. You know, maybe you've gone into a gambling debt issue and now you need lots of money, so now you're susceptible to a social engineering attack by somebody, you know, who's willing to pay to have you compromise information. A lot of people get upset over this because they think it's a privacy issue, you know, but it's a condition of employment. You know, you want to be senior researcher, this is part of what you need to do. So behavioral analysis and vetting of people's behaviors is a big thing. A lot of companies are actually tracking people's access to the network, and they baseline it. You know, your typical day, you come in at 8, you're on, you know, till maybe 6, 7 o'clock at night. You rarely log on the weekends. You know, that's your normal pattern. Now you log on Sunday night at 2 a.m. That's not normal. Someone's going to come and investigate that. They're going to ask you, and maybe it's legit. You know, oh, I got this project due in the morning and I'm late on it, so I stayed up all night to finish it. Oh, okay, no problem. But someone's probably going to investigate that, especially in larger networks where they have the resources to do this kind of tracking. I know a lot of companies track logins to get the fraudulent login. You know, you logged in from you know, Lakeland here today, and 3 minutes later you also logged in from Shanghai, China. Okay, that just can't happen. That can't be you in both places. So we're going to investigate that. So you know, those kind of techniques are starting to crop up in a lot of, you know, security operations. We got to make security part of the problem. This is the theme that comes out of a lot of the think tanks and a lot of the large consulting firms that deal with security, is we've got to get business management at all levels into the concept of security is just another resource I got to manage, along with my cash flow and credit and inventory turns and all that kind of thing. I got to manage my IT security the same way. We got to make it a business problem. So it's up for us technical people to somehow turn all these issues into really business issues at the end of the day. It's not always easy. It sounds like an easy thing to do, but it's not always quite so simple. But that's the way to go, so it becomes part of the normal process. It can't be this unusual process that, you know, happens only when I have an event. And then we've got to get a new handle on privacy. I have this theory that if you can imagine the time before Twitter, looking around the room, there's a few people who can imagine the time before Twitter. I do this in classes. No one knows what I'm talking about. But there was a time when there was no Twitter or Facebook. Okay, I could tell you something personal, and I could be pretty much assured, almost subconsciously, you may go home and tell a spouse, tell a friend, but it would die within 2 or 3 layers of you. Unless there was something really fascinating or interesting. But that's not true anymore. You can immediately tweet this thing out, put it on Facebook. Now billions of people around the world now know this personal fact. So we've got a whole new privacy issue. I don't think people are quite really aware of this yet. We have these issues all the time where people post things on the internet and then they're like horrified that that everyone knows about it. It's like, well, yeah, you put it on Facebook. Sometimes it just doesn't kind of resonate. To me, this is the whole crux of cyberbullying. Bullying's been around since the beginning of man. There ain't nothing new going on here with kids and whatnot. What's new is now the bullying doesn't die within a small community of a classroom or something or a school. It's now the entire world, which is why people become so depressed and distraught, and we have all those kind of issues that come from that. It's because of this global privacy dimension that has sprung up. This, I think, is an iceberg kind of issue where we think we understand it, but there's more down below the surface that we haven't even discovered yet. And how it's going to impact society going forward is pretty much anyone's guess. I enjoy talking to the new students who come into class to kind of get their view of privacy. I do see a change. People don't value personal privacy as much, I think, in some of the younger generations as my older people might, kind of thing. So that's a whole issue that's out there that has to be addressed. I attended an interesting conference. It was to an audience of chief legal counsels. So it wasn't a technical presentation. It was more oriented at a room full of lawyers, which was kind of an interesting experience. And from Richard Clarke, and Richard Clarke has been the advisor to a number of presidents on IT issues. At the time he gave this talk, he was handling the Snowden issue for the White House, and one of his themes was you can't protect yourself, really. I mean, you're gonna get hacked, right? He made the statement that there are 2 kinds of organizations in this world: those that have been hacked and know it, and those that have been hacked and don't know it. There's no one who hasn't been hacked. And even at the personal level, the theme was you're gonna have your credit card compromised, you're gonna have your bank account compromised. Just roll with it. Get used to it and have an incident plan, both personally and corporations. When it happens, know what you're going to do. Think about it today. What are you going to do? Well, if you go home tonight and find out there's fraudulent charges in your checking account, don't panic. You should already have thought, well, this is what I'm going to do. Now it might have been a little hyperbole. I don't think it sat well maybe with some of the folks in that meeting, but I think he was kind of being hyperbole to sort of get a point home. And his message was, find out what really matters. Like for corporations, what intellectual property, what trade secret, what is there about your organization that will absolutely put you out of business? It's absolutely the worst thing that could happen. Find out what those things are and go protect those. Now, no one's saying that you shouldn't lock the front door, that you shouldn't have antivirus software on your PC, that you shouldn't have firewalls. You need all that stuff. I mean, that's just normal, best practice, preventative sort of things. But don't think that it's going to protect you from cybercrime and attacks. You need to be prepared in your mind that it's going to happen to me someday, and I'm going to think through, what I'm going to do when it does happen. Have a plan. Now, that was kind of his message, and it was kind of an interesting sort of thought. But you're getting this a lot from security consultants. You need to get in tune with, you're going to get hacked, and what are you going to do? And it's a tough conversation to have with business management sometimes, because until they actually have an event, it's not real for them. And it's hard for them to sit down at a table and think, well, see, what if this happened or that happened or some other thing happened? So it's morphing into disaster recovery sort of processes. Disaster recovery isn't just about the building burning down anymore. It's about, I got hacked and I lost the trade secret, kind of thing. So detection and response is the big issue. And there are lots of new technologies that are coming out in that space of detection and response. A lot of great products on the marketplace that will help us do that. And that's kind of the posture that a lot of leading edge security organizations are putting into place at their organizations. So you can't be absolutely secure. And the other piece is sharing of information. This is tough. I'm the sector chief here in Northern Ohio for InfraGard, and it's all about sharing information. I mean, that's why the organization exists, is for trusted people to share information about here's the kind of attacks we see, here's how we're addressing them, here's best practices that work for us, maybe it'll work for you, that kind of thing. It is difficult for people to do that. I think it's part of the privacy issue. I think privacy and trust are kind of two sides of the same coin there. But that's kind of where some of the power is. If some area organization here in Northern Ohio has some sort of an attack or a breach this week, it'd be nice if the rest of us knew it. We don't need to know they lost money or lost trade secrets. We just need to know what that attack looked like and what did you do to mitigate it, so that we can get ready. We haven't had the attack yet, but we're going to be smarter. Maybe we can avoid the attack, or maybe we can respond better because we've had the advantage of your experience, kind of thing. That's what the goal is. But it's tough, but it's getting there. There's lots of information sharing activities going on in Homeland Security and other organizations inside the government. But you're the problem. We need to get you guys up to speed on what these risks are. So talks like this, you get a better feel for what we're up against. But we really need, out in the workplace, as you handle confidential information, I want your hands to be sweaty. I want you to be worried about, I'm handling confidential information. I've got the company's trade secrets sitting on my machine. I'm not going to be content until I'm done and I put them back into these, the secure vault, so to speak. I'm not going to be sloppy and say, well, I'm going to take it home this weekend and work on it. No, I think I'll stop at the mall and do some shopping, leave my laptop in the car. Maybe I downloaded all kinds of HR information. I'm going to do some kind of an analysis for benefits for the company. So I download all kinds of HR information with your social security numbers and salaries and whatnot. And I need to say to myself, well, do I really need that for my analysis? Maybe I'll first thing I'll do is I'm going to delete the columns I don't need. So I'm get myself the summary information. I'll feel better once I get the summary information, in case someone stole my laptop or the thumb drive or whatever it is. We need people thinking in those kind of terms. We all hear about how they download all kinds of personal information onto some laptop, and then it gets stolen out of the backseat of someone's car over the weekend. It's like, what are they thinking? They had this information. But they're not thinking is the problem. So there's a lot of user awareness programs. There's a lot of regulations. There's the acronym soup up there of regulations that require some kind of awareness training programs. Now organizations can take it as a checklist item. I go buy a program from any number of vendors, we run everybody through it, check, I'm done. That's not going to do it. It has to be a program that actually has an effective impact on changing behavior and changing thought processes. We're humans. The day in and day out grind of going to work wears you down. As I said, you may leave here paranoid, you'll be fine by Tuesday. You'll be back to your old ways by Tuesday. That's the problem, right? I need to give you that vitamin shot, every month, every week, every whatever, to keep you aware of these issues. Don't click on the message that you don't recognize. Don't do your home shopping on your company network, on the company machine. You're in charge of electronic banking for the company. Don't use your machine to buy, boots at Cabela's. Say, well, I'm going to wait till I get home to do that because I don't want to take a risk of infecting my machine with some malware. I see messages in my email box. I don't recognize this person. I don't recognize the topic. Don't even look at it. Just delete it. so many people are so curious, and these messages can be very enticing. Even myself, I'm a professional paranoid. I get paid to be paranoid. Even I've been tempted by some of these messages. They're so well crafted. We're coming into the Christmas season. The classic message is from UPS and FedEx, right? You got a nice little logo there. It looks just like a FedEx message. A package has been delivered. You weren't home. Click the link to find out when we're going to deliver it next. It's the holiday season. Everyone probably is expecting a package. It's not unusual to get a package. You don't even think about it. Click. I unpacked one of these one day. Ran it in a virtual environment. You click on the link, it reached out to a data center outside Moscow, pulled down a tar file, opened it up, modified registry entries, loaded some exe in, gathered up every DOC and XLS file in the machine into a zip file and sent it to a colo center outside of Paris. It all happened in less time than I said that sentence. It was the most amazing thing. So you click on that link, and by the time you said, gee, I wonder if I should have clicked on that link, it's all done. Everything on your machine is now out there. Who knows who they are or what they want to do to it? Okay, so security awareness is a big thing, and it's going to become part of most companies' organizational and contractual relationships. Behavioral analysis, baselining behavior, this is more and more a big topic in the technology space. Watching connections, do they make sense? Are they appropriate? Lots of tools in this space, and there's going to be more and more tools in this space. This is all part of that borderless network thing. I got a connection coming from Panera Bread. Is it really part of my corporation or not, kind of thing. And there's lots of things going on there. But here's the one big message. Think back in the early 1900s. Industrial safety was kind of lax. We had the rise of unions, and a lot of the major issues of those early unions were health and safety, especially the mines, that kind of thing. Today, no one even thinks about that. Industrial safety is a given. No one would complain about industrial safety. No one would think it's overhead. It's just a normal part of the business life that we follow OSHA guidelines. We want to be a safe plant. We worry about health and safety. And there's no senior business person who would, poo-poo health and safety. We need to get IT security to that space, where you come to work every day and you don't complain about, gee, I can't get to every website that I'd like to go to. I'm not supposed to click on, email links that I don't recognize. You just, that's to be a normal sort of part of your normal behavior and process. So I think we'll get there, but it's going to be a while. And of course, we need to rethink privacy. We kind of talked about that. But one of the things in privacy is the puzzle factor, the metadata and the puzzle factor. Right after 9/11, I think it's part of the 9/11 Commission, the worry was, do any government websites disclose classified information? And the group came back and said, no website discloses classified information. However, multiple websites do. I take a little fact from here and a little fact from there and a little fact from over there, and I've got a classified piece of information. This goes on in corporate America as well, where we want to market our products and tout our expertise and whatnot, but in the process we might be giving away secrets or giving away information that attackers can use to come after us. So we need to be a little paranoid about what we put out there in the public. And of course, it's all about detecting it and then knowing what you're going to do. Have a plan in mind. I attended a personal security conference about a year ago, and one of the messages there was, the best thing you can do is always think about what would happen. What would happen if, as I walked to the car, some carjacker tried to steal my car? What would I do? Where would I run? What building could I go to? Is there an emergency phone I could call? It's not that you got to live your life in fear, but just think about, I'm in this room, but there was a fire. How would I get out of the room? Well, we got windows there, we got a door, I know my way out, kind of thing. So just think ahead. Same thing with security, both corporate IT security as well as personal IT security. What will you do when it happens? Because the advice is it will happen eventually. Know what it is that's important to you, set your priorities, and worry about protecting that, and don't focus on trying to do everything. And of course, information sharing I'm in the information sharing business. It's tough to get people to share information, but I think part of the problem is you don't know who you're talking to. I may be talking to a cyber criminal when I'm sharing information, or I may be talking to someone who doesn't have the same concern I do about keeping things confidential or whatever. So we got a ways to go in this front, I think. But I think eventually we'll find some mechanism in which we can kind of do this sort of thing. So the problem's ours, and you're the solution. So hopefully you can go out today and be more part of the solution than part of the problem. So thanks for coming. If anyone's got any questions, we can deal with questions. I think it's going to be a while because the political process is slow. There's going to be legislation wrapped around that. But most of the large industrial companies are already there. I mean, they amongst themselves have developed best practice guidelines for themselves. So I think any regulation is just going to pretty much augment that or codify that. So I'm fairly confident the large manufacturers are worrying about this and dealing with it. I hear about it all the time. It's something people worry about all the time. It's the smaller company that is probably going to need some kind of regulation carrot to get them to go out and make changes. But the problem with all these guidelines is they're very generic, and we need specific steps. I hear this all the time from the technical management people of, I don't know what they want me to do. Here's some entry in some piece of regulation, but how do I implement it? Exactly what should I be doing? And it can be pretty broad and pretty generic. But I think it's going to be a while because the political process is a while. We have this discussion a lot about people encrypt their laptops, they encrypt data, and they think, I'm good. You're good if someone tries to steal the actual at-rest encrypted data. But you're not good if you're logged onto your laptop or if some program has that data, because the encryption has to be, in essence, turned off for that system to use it, right? So it's easy for me to hack a system and basically share the same connection you're on to get to the raw data. And you're right. I mean, instead of stealing data, I'll just go alter it. I'll violate the integrity of the data. It depends on what my mission is. If I want to give a company a hard time, I'll make all their numbers look like they're out of compliance and they get a fine from the EPA or something like that. But that's just the nature of whatever that attack is designed to do. But in terms of piercing encrypted data, it really only protects data at rest. So if my laptop is powered off and it's encrypted and someone steals it, I can feel fairly comfortable, not totally comfortable, that my data is secure. But when I'm logged onto it, I click on the email message, that's all in the clear. It's not encrypted anymore because you're going to use my connection to get to my data. And same thing with corporate systems. This is the PCI's got these kind of issues wrapped around it. Encrypting PII, personal information, and whatnot. Is it at rest or is it in transit? So it's a thorny topic. But encryption's not always the fail-safe methodology people think it is.
I think we're at the end of time. Okay. If you have questions after, Doug will be here to answer them for you. Thank you all so much for coming out today. It was fascinating.
Thanks.